The microphone was live. The camera was rolling. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was about to make the biggest mistake of her political career. She didn't know it yet. Nobody in the hearing room knew it yet. Not the packed press gallery. Not her social media team watching from 3 floors up with their fingers hovering over the post button. Not the millions of followers who were about to tune in for what they thought would be another viral takedown. Another moment of progressive triumph captured in 30 perfect seconds and shared across every platform before the sun went down. But Kash Patel knew it. He'd been waiting for it. He sat at the witness table with his hands folded, his navy suit pressed, no tie, and a thick binder to his left with color-coded tabs that he hadn't opened yet because he didn't need to. He'd memorized every page, every footnote, every contradiction, every receipt. The room was electric with anticipation. The Rayburn Building hearing room was standing room only, every seat taken, cameras positioned at every angle, #Patel hearing already climbing the trending charts. This was supposed to be her moment, the moment where the most media-savvy member of Congress grilled the Trump-appointed FBI director, exposed his corruption, defended immigrant families, and walked away with enough viral content to fund her next 3 campaigns. That was the plan. But plans require preparation, and preparation requires knowing who you're up against. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had prepared for a political operative, a MAGA loyalist with a Fox News contract and a conspiracy theory habit. She'd prepared for someone who would get flustered under questioning, someone who would dodge and deflect, someone who would give her the defensive reaction she needed to clip and caption and deploy across the internet within minutes. She had not prepared for a trial lawyer. She had not prepared for someone who had spent 3 years as a public defender in Miami-Dade County, representing the exact immigrant communities she was about to invoke. She had not prepared for someone who had tried more cases before juries than everyone on her staff combined. She had not prepared for someone who understood that a congressional hearing is just a courtroom with cameras, and the person who controls the record controls the narrative. She was about to find out. "Director Patel," she said, her voice sharp and rising, "do you have any comprehension of what it means to be an immigrant in this country right now? To live in constant fear? To wonder every single morning if today is the day armed federal agents kick down your door and tear your family apart?" It was the question, the emotional closer, the kill shot, the moment designed to go viral because there was no good answer. Agree and look weak, disagree and look heartless. Either way, she wins. Either way, the clip travels. Either way, the donations pour in before midnight. Except this time, there was a third option. This time, the witness had an answer she hadn't prepared for. This time, the man sitting across from her leaned into his microphone and spoke in the calm, measured voice of someone who had defended the accused in federal court and learned long ago that the quieter you speak, the harder people listen. "Congresswoman," he said, "my parents immigrated to this country from India. My father arrived with a suitcase and a degree that nobody here recognized. I grew up in Garden City, New York, in a house smaller than this hearing room." He paused, not for drama, for precision. "And before I became a national security prosecutor, before I worked at the White House, before I became director of the FBI, I spent the first years of my career as a public defender in Miami-Dade County, Florida. I represented the poorest, most vulnerable people in the criminal justice system. Many of them were immigrants. Many were undocumented. I sat with them in holding cells. I argued their cases before judges who wanted to deport them. I made sure they had legal representation, because that's what the Constitution requires." He looked directly at her. "So yes, Congresswoman, I have some idea." The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way it shifts in movies with swelling music and gasps. More like the way a courtroom shifts when a witness says something unexpected and everyone quietly recalculates what they thought they knew. AOC's mouth opened, closed. She hadn't known about Miami-Dade. Nobody on her team had told her. The briefing notes said political operative, conspiracy theorist, MAGA loyalist with no real credentials. Nobody mentioned the public defender years. Nobody mentioned the holding cells. Nobody mentioned the undocumented clients he'd represented while she was bartending in the Bronx. And Patel wasn't finished. But I'll tell you what I find interesting, Congresswoman. While I was in those courtrooms defending immigrants, making sure they had lawyers, making sure their constitutional rights were protected, you were live streaming a webinar telling them to resist federal law enforcement, not to hire lawyers, not to exercise their rights through proper legal channels, to resist, to create, and I'm quoting you directly, enough friction that they cannot go as fast as they want to go. He let the quote hang in the air. Do you know what happens when an undocumented person physically resists a federal officer executing a valid warrant? They get additional criminal charges: obstruction, resisting arrest, sometimes assault on a federal officer, charges that make it exponentially harder for any lawyer, any public defender like I used to be, to help them avoid deportation or secure any kind of relief. Your webinar didn't protect immigrants, Congresswoman. It put them in greater legal danger, and you knew that, or you should have. Silence, the kind that cameras love and politicians fear. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at her seat, microphone live, red timer light still blinking, and for the first time in her congressional career, a career built on never being at a loss for words, she had nothing to say. To understand how they got here, how the most media-savvy member of Congress walked into a hearing she designed as performance art and walked out as the subject of an autopsy, you have to go back 6 hours. Back to the morning when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was still rehearsing her questions in front of a mirror and had no idea that the man she was about to interrogate had already read every financial disclosure, every ethics report, every campaign finance filing, and every tweet she'd ever posted. 7:30 in the morning. Longworth House Office Building. AOC's Chief of Staff, Mike Casca, was already in the office with coffee, printed timelines, and social media analytics from the previous night's pre-hearing posts. Engagement is absolutely through the roof, Casca said, scrolling through numbers on his tablet. The Instagram story about your prep session got 2 million views overnight. The tweet about holding Patel accountable is at 40,000 retweets and climbing. Progressive media is primed. They're expecting fireworks. They'll get them, AOC said. She sat at her desk and opened the folder. Inside were 5 questions, each one carefully crafted, each one designed not to elicit information. Congressional hearings almost never elicit information, but to create a moment, a clip, a piece of content that would travel. The strategy was textbook AOC. Simple, effective, proven. Question 1. Establish the human cost. Mention families. Mention children. Make the witness either acknowledge the suffering, which makes the administration look cruel, or dismiss it, which makes the witness look heartless. Question 2. Pivot to constitutional violations. Cite a specific case. An undocumented mother detained at a school. A father taken from a hospital. Make it personal. Make it visual. Question 3. Attack qualifications. Patel has no FBI background. He's a political operative who wrote a memo for Devin Nunes and went on Fox News. Say it on camera. Make it stick. Question 4. The money shot. The emotional closer. The do you even see them as human beings question that becomes the tweet, the headline, the fundraising email subject line. We're not here to get answers from Patel, Casca reminded her. We're here to get clips of Patel looking bad. AOC nodded. She knew the game better than anyone in Congress. She'd invented the modern version of it. Before her, congressional hearings were boring C-SPAN affairs that nobody watched. She turned them into viral content factories. Her questioning of witnesses had generated more views than most Netflix shows. She understood framing, pacing, the pause before the kill shot, the moment to look directly into the camera instead of at the witness. Patel is a MAGA loyalist with no real law enforcement background, her communications director Jard Stein said. He got the job because he wrote a memo attacking the FBI and went on Fox News enough times. He's going to be defensive and evasive. That's what we want. Remember the Zuckerberg hearing? Casca added. You made him sweat for 5 minutes and the clip got 60 million views. Same playbook. Patel is Zuckerberg with a badge. AOC smiled. She was wearing a red blazer, power color, pops on camera, and gold earrings she'd bought from a small business in the Bronx that she'd later tag on Instagram. Every detail was curated: the outfit, the earrings, the folder she'd carry into the hearing room, visible to cameras, labeled in bold marker, accountability. She'd learned early that congressional hearings aren't debates, they're productions, and she was the best producer in Congress. Her social media coordinator, Maya Torres, ran through the post schedule. We've got a pre-hearing tweet queued for 9:45. Today, I'm holding the FBI accountable for its war on immigrant families. Draft clip captions are ready for 3 scenarios: him refusing to answer, him getting defensive, or him saying something inflammatory. We've also got the fundraising email drafted. Subject line: I just confronted the FBI director about his attacks on immigrants. He didn't like it. Perfect, AOC said. What they didn't know, couldn't have known, because they'd done the kind of surface-level opposition research that comes from reading headlines rather than court filings, was that Kash Patel had tried more jury trials than every member of AOC staff combined. That he'd started his career not as a Republican operative, but as a public defender representing indigent clients in one of the busiest criminal courts in America. That he'd spent 3 years at the Department of Justice under Barack Obama prosecuting terrorists. That he'd convicted al-Qaeda operatives in cases that required the kind of meticulous, methodical preparation that congressional theatrics do not. They thought they were preparing to grill a political hack. They were preparing to cross-examine a trial lawyer. 3 blocks away, in the FBI director's office at the Hoover Building, Patel sat with his general counsel Lauren Mitchell and deputy director Dan Bongino. The TV was on, muted, showing the cable news pregame. Every channel was running the same graphic: Patel to face grilling on immigration enforcement. She's going to go emotional first, Bongino said. Families being torn apart, children crying, she'll have a photo. She always has a photo. Then she'll pivot to my qualifications, Patel said. She's going to call me a political operative, say I'm not qualified to run the FBI. And then the closer, Mitchell added, the big emotional question, the one designed to go viral. Patel opened his binder. It was organized with colored tabs: blue for AOC's public statements, red for the House Ethics Committee report, green for FEC filings and campaign finance records, yellow for the webinar transcript. Here's what she doesn't understand, Patel said. She thinks I'm going to sit there and take it. She thinks I'm going to be defensive. Every witness she's ever questioned has been defensive because that's what happens when a camera is in your face and someone is accusing you of being a monster. You flinch. You stammer. You look guilty even when you're not. He tapped the binder. But she's never cross-examined someone who's done cross-examination. She's used to bankers who get nervous, tech executives who speak in jargon, cabinet secretaries who have been coached to give non-answers. She's not used to someone who's going to let her talk, wait for her to finish, and then read her own paperwork back to her. Mitchell nodded. The Ethics Committee report is the strongest card, bipartisan. 5 Democrats voted for it. She can't call it a Republican hit job. The webinar transcript is the second strongest, Bongino added. Her own voice, her own words, friction. Resist. You can't spin your own words. And the FEC filing is the closer, Patel said. She built her entire brand on being clean. No corporate PAC money. It's in her Twitter bio right now today. And the FEC record shows nearly $1 million moved through PACs and shell companies that her chief of staff controlled. She's either lying about her brand or ignorant of her own finances. Neither is a good look. He closed the binder. I'm not going to be defensive. I'm going to answer her questions completely, truthfully, and in detail. And every answer is going to include a fact about her that she doesn't want on camera. Bongino grinned. Judo. Judo, Patel confirmed. She provides the energy. I provide the direction. The hearing began at 10. The hearing room was already at capacity 30 minutes before the gavel. AOC arrived through the main corridor with Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush flanking her, cameras flashing. A brief statement to the press cluster at the door. Today, we hold this administration accountable for its war on immigrant families. She walked in like a boxer entering the ring, chin up, shoulders back, the red blazer bright against the wood-paneled walls. The folder marked accountability visible to every camera in the room. Patel entered through a side door. No entourage, no statement, just a man with a binder walking to a witness table. He sat down, adjusted his microphone, opened a bottle of water. He looked like an accountant arriving for a quarterly review. The contrast was deliberate on both sides. AOC wanted drama. Patel wanted calm. She wanted the hearing to feel like a confrontation. He wanted it to feel like an audit. Only one of them would get what they wanted. Chairman Jim Jordan gavelled the room to order and read the opening statement. The Committee on the Judiciary will come to order. Today, we will hear testimony from FBI Director Kash Patel on the Bureau's law enforcement priorities, with particular focus on counterterrorism, cartel interdiction, and immigration enforcement. The first 90 minutes were unremarkable. Republican members asked Patel about FBI operations, arrest statistics, fentanyl seizures. Patel answered with numbers. 25,000 immigration-related arrests since January, 350 Tren de Aragua gang members, 195 MS-13 members, 66,000 kilograms of cocaine, 1,500 kilograms of fentanyl, 59 foreign intelligence operatives arrested for espionage. The numbers were impressive, but they were boring on camera, which is exactly what AOC was counting on. By the time her 5 minutes arrived, the audience would be hungry for something emotional, something human, something that cut through the data. She would provide it. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York for 5 minutes, Jordan said. AOC straightened in her seat, adjusted her microphone, looked directly at Patel, not at the camera. Not yet. That would come later. For now, she looked at him the way a prosecutor looks at a hostile witness. Director Patel, she began, since you took over the FBI, your agency has participated in what can only be described as a mass dragnet targeting immigrant communities. ICE raids in residential neighborhoods, agents showing up at schools, parents detained in front of their children. Is this the FBI you're proud of? Patel leaned forward. Congresswoman, I appreciate the question. Let me give you some context for those operations. Since January 20th, the FBI has arrested over 25,000 individuals in connection with immigration enforcement. Of those, approximately 9,000 were flagged for violent criminal histories. Prior convictions for murder, assault, sexual offenses, narcotics trafficking. 350 were confirmed members of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan prison gang that has established operations in at least 17 American cities. 195 were MS-13. He paused, let the numbers register. We also seized 1,500 kilograms of fentanyl during these operations. Fentanyl, as you know, kills approximately 70,000 Americans per year. 1,500 kilos is enough to kill every resident of New York City 3 times over. Director Patel, I didn't ask about fentanyl. You asked if I'm proud of the FBI's operations. I am, because every one of those arrests represents a community that is safer. Many of those communities, I should note, are immigrant communities. The victims of Tren de Aragua are overwhelmingly Latino immigrants, people who came to this country legally and are now being extorted, threatened, and assaulted by a Venezuelan prison gang that entered through the southern border. The victims of fentanyl trafficking are overwhelmingly working-class Americans, including immigrants in your own district. He shifted slightly in his chair. I'd also note that the FBI has arrested 59 foreign intelligence operatives since January for espionage or smuggling dangerous substances into the country. 59 foreign spies, not immigrants, spies. There is a difference, and I'd appreciate it if this committee recognized it. We're protecting the people you claim to represent, Congresswoman. The question is whether you'd prefer we stopped. AOC's jaw tightened. This wasn't going according to script. He wasn't supposed to have numbers ready. He wasn't supposed to pivot to protecting immigrants. She needed to regain control. Director Patel, you hosted a webinar where you described your plan to, and I quote, crush violent crime. But Tom Homan, your border czar, has publicly threatened to prosecute me for conducting a Know Your Rights session for my constituents, a session where I read from the Constitution. Is this your FBI? One that threatens members of Congress for reading the Bill of Rights? Patel nodded slowly. I'm glad you raised that webinar, Congresswoman, because I've read the transcript, your entire transcript, not just the parts your office released. And I'd like to read one passage back to you if the chairman will permit. Jordan nodded. Patel opened the yellow tab in his binder, found the page, read in a flat, measured voice. Quote, when one of these things comes to your backyard, you can resist. And when that happens over millions of people, you generate enough friction that they cannot go as fast as they want to go. End quote. He looked up. Congresswoman, that's not reading the Constitution. The Constitution says you have the right to remain silent. It says you have the right to an attorney. It says you're protected from unreasonable searches. Those are rights, and everyone, citizen and non-citizen alike, is entitled to them. I support those rights. As a former public defender, I spent years making sure people understood those rights. But you didn't read the Constitution in that webinar. You instructed millions of viewers to resist federal law enforcement. You told them to create friction. That word friction is not a constitutional term. It's a tactical term. It means physical obstruction. And when undocumented individuals follow that advice and physically resist officers executing lawful warrants, they don't gain rights. They gain criminal charges. He set the transcript down. If one of my agents conducted a seminar instructing people on how to create friction against law enforcement operations, I would terminate them. And I find it remarkable that a member of Congress who took an oath to support and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States is actively coaching people on how to resist the enforcement of those laws. AOC's communications director, watching from 3 floors up, texted Casca. She needs to pivot now. Casca glanced at his phone, then at AOC, but she was already pivoting. She could feel the round slipping away from her. Feel the energy in the room tilting toward Patel, and she did what she always did when a line of questioning wasn't working. She went personal. Director Patel, let's talk about your qualifications. Before becoming FBI director, your primary experience was as a political operative for Congressman Devin Nunes. You authored a memo that was widely discredited. You promoted conspiracy theories about the Russia investigation. You have zero experience managing a law enforcement agency. How can the American people trust you to lead the FBI? She said it fast. Machine gun delivery. The style that worked on camera because it gave the witness no time to respond before the next accusation landed. But Patel didn't try to answer each accusation. He waited until she was finished. Let the silence stretch for 2 full seconds, an eternity in a hearing room. Then he spoke. Congresswoman, since you've raised the subject of qualifications, I'm happy to address it. Let me walk you through my career, since you seem to be unfamiliar with it. I graduated from law school and began my career in 2005 as a public defender in Miami-Dade County, Florida. For 3 years, I represented indigent defendants, people who couldn't afford attorneys. Many were immigrants. Many were undocumented. I tried jury cases ranging from murder to narcotics trafficking to complex financial fraud. In 2014, I joined the Department of Justice as a national security prosecutor under President Obama. I led investigations across multiple theaters of conflict and personally prosecuted members of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I tried those cases in federal court. I obtained convictions. I then served as senior counsel for the House Intelligence Committee, where I led the investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election, an investigation that both parties agreed was necessary. I uncovered intelligence malpractice during the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation, findings that were later corroborated by the Inspector General. I served as Deputy Assistant to the President on the National Security Council, where I oversaw counterterrorism operations, including the elimination of senior Al-Qaeda and ISIS leadership and the repatriation of dozens of American hostages. He paused. Now, Congresswoman, your career. You graduated from Boston University in 2011 with a bachelor's degree in international relations and economics. You worked as a bartender and waitress, which is honest and respectable work. In 2018, you were elected to Congress. You have never tried a case. You have never conducted a criminal investigation. You have never held a security clearance. You have never prosecuted or defended anyone in any court. I don't say this to diminish your career. You've achieved remarkable things in electoral politics, but you opened this door. You questioned my qualifications. So I'm simply putting both of our resumes on the table and letting the American people decide who is qualified to discuss law enforcement. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when something lands so cleanly that nobody knows how to react. AOC's face cycled through three emotions in rapid succession: shock, fury, and something that looked almost like recognition. The recognition that she'd made a tactical error and there was no way to undo it on camera. Chairman Jordan's face was carefully neutral, but the Republican members behind him were not as disciplined. Several were suppressing smiles. One was openly grinning. AOC regrouped. She had maybe 90 seconds left. She could feel the time draining away. Feel the 5 minutes that were supposed to be her stage collapsing into ruin. She needed to change the subject entirely. She needed something that would put Patel back on defense. Director Patel, since you want to talk about qualifications and accountability, she said, her voice harder now, the performance abandoned, real anger seeping through, let's talk about yours. Your FBI has been accused of political persecution. You maintain a list of so-called government gangsters. You've targeted former FBI officials who investigated your boss. You've turned the Bureau into a personal instrument of revenge for Donald Trump. Is that your idea of law enforcement? Patel's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. The patience of a man who has been waiting for exactly this opening. Congresswoman, I appreciate your concern about accountability. Let me demonstrate what accountability looks like by noting a few items from the public record. Your record. He opened the red tab. July 2025. The House Ethics Committee, bipartisan, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, released its report on your attendance at the 2021 Met Gala. The committee found unanimously that you impermissibly accepted gifts in violation of House rules, standards of conduct, and federal law. Those gifts included a custom designer gown, professional hair and makeup services, accessories, and a complimentary ticket for your partner. The committee found that you failed to reimburse vendors in a timely manner, and that several vendors were only paid after the investigation began and after they threatened your campaign. AOC's lawyer, seated behind her, started to rise. She waved him down. The dress, Patel continued, read, "Tax the rich." You wore it at an event where tickets cost $35,000 per person. You wore a dress demanding that the wealthy pay their fair share while accepting that dress and everything that came with it for free from the rich. The committee called your conduct inconsistent with House rules, laws, and other standards of conduct. Those are their words, not mine. The Ethics Committee found my violations were not knowing and willful. AOC started. That's correct. They didn't find criminal intent. They found carelessness. They found that you relied on staff and designers to calculate fair market value, and that those calculations, quote, did not fully account for the true cost of the unique goods and services you received, which is another way of saying you accepted expensive gifts and didn't bother to figure out what they were worth until someone made you. He turned a page. Shall I continue? Your former chief of staff, Saket Chakrabarty, established 2 political action committees, Justice Democrats PAC and Brand New Congress PAC, and a limited liability company, Brand New Congress LLC. Between 2016 and 2018, those PACs transferred nearly $1 million to the LLC, which Chakrabarty owned under the description Strategic Consulting. Your campaign also paid his LLC for consulting, and his PAC, the one you sat on the board of, paid your then-boyfriend Riley Roberts $6,000 for marketing consulting. He let that sit. You campaigned on the slogan, 100% people funded, no corporate PAC money. That's still in your Twitter bio. Meanwhile, your chief of staff was operating what the FEC complaint described as a shadowy web of PACs and LLCs that moved nearly $1 million with minimal disclosure. The FEC investigated. 3 of 6 commissioners voted to find reason to believe violations had occurred. 3 voted against. A tie, which means 3 federal election commissioners believed your campaign broke the law. The case was closed only because the FEC couldn't reach a majority, not because you were cleared. And as recently as March of this year, Americans for Public Trust filed another ethics complaint about your use of taxpayer funds, specifically payments from your member representational allowance. That's the taxpayer-funded budget every member of Congress receives for official duties, to a dance company and an individual labeled as training. When asked about it, you tweeted, and I quote, 100% wrong. None of this is taxpayer money. This is an FEC filing. He looked up. That statement was false, Congresswoman. The payments in question were disbursed from your MRA, your taxpayer-funded office budget, not from your campaign, not from an FEC filing. From the account the American taxpayer funds for your official duties. You told the public it wasn't their money. It was. AOC's timer was blinking. She had 30 seconds left, maybe 40. Her mind was racing, scrolling through the playbook for the response, for the pivot, for the thing she could say that would rescue this moment and turn it into something she could use. She found it. The one card she always played when everything else failed. The emotional card. The immigrant card. The card that had worked every single time because nobody, no Republican, no Fox News host, no hearing witness, had ever been able to counter it without looking like a monster. She leaned into the microphone, softened her voice, let the anger drain away and replaced it with something that sounded like pain. Director Patel, I think it's clear what's happening here. You're using this hearing to attack me because I defend immigrant communities, because I stand with people who are afraid, because I dare to challenge this administration's cruelty. But I want to ask you one more question, and I want you to answer honestly. She paused, looked at the camera, then back at him. Do you have any idea what it is like to be an immigrant in this country right now? To wake up every morning terrified that your mother, your father, your children will be dragged out of their homes by armed men. And now we're back where we started. This was the moment she thought would save her, the viral question, the clip that would overwrite everything else. The immigrant story that nobody could counter without looking heartless. But you already know what happened. Patel told her about his parents, about Garden City, about Miami-Dade, about the holding cells and the indigent clients and the years he spent defending immigrants in court while she was tending bar in the Bronx. None of it was an insult. All of it was devastating. While I was in those courtrooms defending immigrants, making sure they had lawyers, making sure their constitutional rights were protected, he said, his voice still flat, still measured, still the voice of a man reading facts into a record. You were using them as props for fundraising emails. While I was making sure undocumented defendants understood their right to counsel, you were live streaming instructions on how to resist federal law enforcement, which doesn't protect them. It puts them in more danger. Your webinar didn't give them lawyers, Congresswoman. It told them to resist. It told them to create friction. And when an undocumented person follows that advice and resists a federal officer, they don't get protected. They get additional charges: obstruction, resisting arrest, assault on a federal officer, charges that make it virtually impossible for any attorney to help them avoid deportation. I protected immigrants by defending them in court. You endangered them by telling them to fight officers carrying valid warrants, and then you fundraised on it. The timer on AOC's microphone went to 0. The red light died. Her 5 minutes were over. She sat down. She didn't have a response. Not because there wasn't one. There's always a response in politics. But because the one she needed would have required her to know things she didn't know. To have prepared for an opponent she hadn't studied. To have anticipated that the man sitting at the witness table wasn't the caricature her team had briefed her on, but a trial lawyer with a public defender's resume and a prosecutor's instinct for the jugular. Chairman Jordan waited 3 seconds, then spoke. The gentlewoman's time has expired. Director Patel, Do you have anything to add for the record? Patel straightened his papers. Just briefly, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez questioned my qualifications, my integrity, and my commitment to immigrant communities today. I answered every question she asked. I'd note for the record that she did not answer any of mine. She asked me if I understand what immigrants face. I do. My parents were immigrants. I defended immigrants in court. The question I'd ask her, the question she didn't answer, is simpler. If you say tax the rich, why did you accept a free dress from them and not pay for it until investigators made you? If you say no corporate PAC money, why did your chief of staff funnel nearly $1 million through PACs and shell companies that he controlled? If you say you stand with immigrants, why did you tell them to resist federal officers instead of giving them lawyers? And if you say none of this is taxpayer money, why was it your taxpayer-funded office account? He closed his binder. The American people deserve representatives who practice what they preach. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is very good at asking questions. She's less good at answering them. I answered all of hers today. She's welcome to answer mine anytime. He sat back. Jordan gavelled the session forward. The next member began asking questions about fentanyl seizures. The hearing continued, but the hearing was over. Everyone in the room knew it. The press gallery was already filing. The producers in the control rooms were already cutting the clip. The social media managers were already drafting the posts. AOC sat in her chair. Rashida Tlaib leaned over and whispered something. AOC shook her head. Her phone was buzzing, Casca, Stein, the whole team, but she didn't look at it. She stared straight ahead at the wall behind Patel's head. At nothing. Cori Bush tried again. AOC held up a hand, not now. 3 rows behind her, Jamal Bowman sat with his arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the Republican side of the dais for any sign of gloating he could use as content. There was plenty. Several members were openly scrolling their phones, reading the real-time reactions, sharing clips that were already spreading. One staffer was literally high-fiving another in the hallway outside the open door. Bowman photographed none of it. For once, the machine had nothing to work with. In AOC's Longworth office, Maya Torres sat frozen in front of 3 screens. The first showed the C-SPAN feed still live. The second showed Twitter, where #ReceiptsDon'tLie was climbing toward the top trending spot. The third showed the draft fundraising email that was supposed to go out 10 minutes ago, still unsent because the subject line, "I just confronted the FBI director about his attacks on immigrants." He didn't like it. No longer matched reality. The FBI director had liked it just fine. He'd liked it so much that he'd turned every one of her attacks into a counterattack, and the footage was already everywhere. Torres deleted the draft, opened a new document, started typing. Today, the Trump administration's FBI director launched an unprecedented personal attack against me in a congressional hearing. She got halfway through the sentence and stopped. It wasn't unprecedented. He'd answered her questions on camera. That was the problem. You can't call it an attack when the other person is simply responding to your questions with facts from public records. You can't call it persecution when the evidence he cited was from a bipartisan ethics committee with 5 Democrats on it. She closed the document and called Casca. "What do we do?" Casca was silent for 3 seconds. Then, "We do what we always do. We fundraise on it. We spin it as an attack on progressive values. We post our clips, not his. Mike, everyone has already seen his clips. Then we make better ones next time." But both of them knew, in the way that political operatives know things they'll never say out loud, that there wasn't going to be a next time with Patel. Not like this. AOC's power had always come from the asymmetry of preparation. She prepared for performance. Her opponents prepared for policy. And performance always won on camera. For the first time, she'd faced someone who prepared for both. Someone who understood that a hearing room is a courtroom with cameras, and that the person who controls the record controls the narrative. For 4 minutes, no member of the squad posted anything on any platform. In the history of progressive social media, that silence was unprecedented. The clips went viral within the hour. Not AOC's clips, Patel's. The first clip to break was the public defender exchange. 37 seconds. Patel's voice calm and flat, saying, "While I was in those courtrooms defending immigrants, you were using them as props for fundraising emails." It hit 15 million views by dinner time. By the next morning, it was at 47 million. The second clip was the Met Gala takedown, 22 seconds. You wore a dress that said "Tax the Rich" at an event where tickets cost $35,000. You accepted the dress for free from the rich. Simple, brutal, memorable. Someone set it to the curb your enthusiasm theme music, and it became the most shared political video of the month. The third clip was the PAC question, Patel reading the numbers. Nearly $1 million through PACs and shell companies. Your Twitter bio still says no corporate PAC money. Someone screen-grabbed AOC's actual Twitter bio with the claim still there and put it next to the FEC filing, side by side. The contrast did the work. AOC held a press conference 2 hours after the hearing ended. She stood in the hallway outside the Judiciary Committee room, flanked by Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, and gave the speech her team had prepared. "What you saw today," she said, "was a political operative using the power of the FBI to attack a woman of color who dares to hold this administration accountable. This is what fascism looks like. This is what the suppression of dissent looks like. And I will not be silenced." The words were right, the delivery was right, the framing was right. But the problem was that Patel hadn't mentioned her race, hadn't mentioned her gender, hadn't mentioned dissent or fascism or suppression. He'd mentioned an ethics committee report, FEC filings, a webinar transcript, and a tweet. He'd read her own words back to her. He'd cited bipartisan findings from a committee with 5 Democrats on it. The fascism defense didn't stick because the attack it was designed to counter hadn't been made. Progressive media tried to spin it. Patel attacks AOC in political theater, ran the MSNBC Chiron. FBI director uses hearing to target progressive lawmaker, read the Huffington Post headline. But the problem with spin is that it requires the audience to not watch the actual footage. And 47 million people had watched the actual footage. They'd seen AOC ask the questions. They'd seen Patel answer them. They'd seen him read the ethics committee findings, the FEC complaint, her own tweet about taxpayer money. They could judge for themselves. In the Bronx, the reaction was complicated. AOC's district, New York's 14th, covering parts of the Bronx and Queens, is one of the most diverse in the country. It includes large immigrant communities, working-class families, small business owners, and the kind of people who work 60-hour weeks and don't have time for Twitter wars. A local news crew stopped at a bodega on Westchester Avenue. The owner, a Dominican woman named Carmen who had lived in the Bronx for 31 years, gave an interview that was shorter and more devastating than anything said in the hearing room. "She wore a dress that cost more than my rent for a year," Carmen said. "A dress that says tax the rich and she didn't even pay for it. She tells me she's fighting for me. But who's fighting for me when my rent goes up and she's at a party with celebrities? I voted for her 3 times. I'm not sure about a 4th. A young Ecuadorian man who worked at a car wash 2 blocks away was more direct. She told people to resist. My cousin followed that advice, resisted, got charged with obstruction. Now he can't get asylum because he has a criminal charge, thanks to her advice. She was trying to get views on Facebook. My cousin is trying to not get deported." A retired public school teacher named Dolers, who had canvassed for AOC in 2018, said, "I still believe in what she stands for, but there's a difference between what you stand for and what you do. She stands for the working class, but she goes to the Met Gala and takes free dresses and doesn't pay the designers on time. Those designers are working people too." Where was the solidarity? It wasn't anger. It was the particular exhaustion of working-class voters who had believed the story and were starting to notice the footnotes. The polls moved, not dramatically. They never do after a single hearing. But the internal numbers that both parties watched closely showed something that alarmed Democrats more than any headline. AOC's favorability among working-class Latino voters in her district dropped 4 points in a week. Not because they'd suddenly become Republicans. Because they'd seen the Met Gala dress and the Ethics Committee finding and the PAC money and the dance company payment, and they'd done the math that working people always do. She says she's one of us, but she acts like she's one of them. Moderate Democrats who had long been wary of AOC's influence on the party's brand began to distance themselves quietly. No public statements, no dramatic breaks, just a subtle shift in the invitations that didn't come, the joint press conferences that weren't scheduled, the endorsements that were suddenly pending further review. In Washington, the withdrawal of warmth is how parties discipline their own. The deeper damage wasn't in any single clip or headline. It was in the pattern that Patel had laid bare, a pattern of systematic contradiction between brand and behavior that, once you saw it, you couldn't unsee. Tax the rich, but accept free designer goods from the wealthy and pay only when investigators force you. 100% people funded, but run $1 million PAC network through shell companies your chief of staff controls. Stand with immigrants, but tell them to resist federal officers instead of giving them lawyers, increasing their legal jeopardy for the sake of a viral clip. Government accountability, but tweet false information about your own office disbursement when caught using taxpayer money for dance classes. No single item was a career ender. Politicians survive ethics findings. They survive FEC complaints. They survive bad tweets. But the accumulation of them, laid out in sequence by a man who spoke like a prosecutor reading an indictment, created something that was harder to survive than any individual scandal. A credibility gap. The distance between what she said and what she did. The distance between the dress and the bill. Between the slogan and the filing. Between the performance and the record. Patel didn't call her a criminal. He didn't call her corrupt. He didn't call her a hypocrite, though the word hung in the room like smoke. He called her something worse, something more precise, something that in politics is more fatal than any accusation of crime. He called her someone who doesn't practice what she preaches. And he proved it with her own documents, her own words, her own ethics committee findings, not with conspiracy theories or partisan attacks, but with the boring, devastating paperwork of public accountability. She'd walked into the hearing room as the questioner. She'd walked out as the subject, not because Patel had attacked her, but because he'd answered her questions, and every answer was a mirror she didn't want to look into. In the weeks that followed, AOC did what she always did. She fundraised on the controversy. She posted clips, her clips, carefully edited to show only her questions and not his answers. She gave interviews about political persecution and the silencing of progressive voices. The machine still worked. The donations still came, the followers still followed. But something had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even if nobody could quite name it. The shift wasn't in what people thought of her politics. It was in what people thought of her sincerity. And in politics, sincerity is the one thing you can't fundraise your way back to. Kash Patel returned to the Hoover building after the hearing. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post on social media. He went back to work. There were cartel cases to review, fentanyl shipments to intercept, terrorism threats to assess, drone incursions to monitor before the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The kind of work that doesn't trend on Twitter because it's not designed to. When Bongino asked him how he thought it went, Patel shrugged. She asked questions. I answered them. That's how hearings are supposed to work. That's not how her hearings usually work, Bongino said. That's because nobody's ever treated her like opposing counsel before. They treat her like a celebrity. They get intimidated by the camera, by the followers, by the machine. They forget that it's a hearing room, not a studio. And in a hearing room, the person with the better preparation wins, not the person with the better Instagram. When a reporter asked him for comment the next day, he said only, I answered the Congresswoman's questions. I'm available to answer more anytime she'd like. That was it, no victory lap, no gloating, no hashtag. Just a man with a binder full of receipts who'd walked into someone else's performance and turned it into a trial. The receipts don't lie. That was the lesson, not just for AOC, but for anyone who builds a brand on saying one thing while the paperwork says another. Sooner or later, someone reads the paperwork. And when they read it back to you on camera in front of the world, no amount of performance can make the numbers disappear. She'd asked him if he understood what immigrants face. He did. He defended them in court while she was tending bar. He'd represented them in holding cells while she was planning her primary campaign. He'd made sure they had lawyers while she was telling them to resist officers. The question she should have asked, the question she would never ask because it has no good answer, is simpler than the one she chose. Who actually helped them? The man with the law degree and the public defender's caseload, or the woman with the Instagram following and the free dress? She never answered. And that silence, that gap between the performance and the paperwork, between the slogan and the substance, between the brand and the behavior, became the story. Not the story she wanted to tell, not the clip she wanted to share, not the moment she wanted to go viral, but the story that mattered, the story that 50 million people watched, the story that couldn't be edited or captioned or spun away, the story where the receipts spoke louder than the rhetoric, the story where preparation beat performance, the story where the public defender faced the populist and the public defender won, not with attacks, not with insults, not with theatrics, but with something simpler and more powerful than any viral moment could ever be. The truth. Her truth, her words, her documents, her contradictions. Read back to her, line by line, in the calm, measured voice of a man who had spent years in courtrooms learning that the quieter you speak, the harder people listen. And when the timer hit 0 and the red light died and her 5 minutes were over, she had nothing left to say. Because for the first time in her congressional career, someone had given her exactly what she asked for. An answer. A complete answer, a truthful answer, a documented answer. The answer she didn't want. The answer that exposed the gap between who she said she was and who the paperwork showed her to be. The answer that turned her viral moment into his evidence. The answer that made the clips she wanted disappear beneath the clips everyone shared. The answer that proved what trial lawyers have always known and what social media stars keep forgetting. In the end, the record always wins. The record doesn't care about your followers. It doesn't care about your engagement. It doesn't care about your brand or your slogans or your carefully curated image. The record cares about one thing: what actually happened, what you actually said, what you actually did, what you actually filed, what you actually accepted, what you actually paid for, what you actually told people to do. And when someone reads that record back to you, slowly and clearly and calmly, in front of cameras and microphones and millions of people, there's only one thing you can do: answer the question. She didn't. And that's how the most media-savvy member of Congress walked into a hearing she designed as a performance and walked out as a case study in what happens when the performance meets the paperwork, when the brand meets the behavior, when the rhetoric meets the receipts, when the public defender cross-examines the populist, and the only evidence that matters is the evidence you created yourself. That's the story of the day Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez asked Kash Patel if he understood what immigrants face and discovered, too late, that he understood better than she ever had. Not because he tweeted about it, not because he fundraised on it, not because he made it part of his brand, but because he did the work. In the holding cells, in the courtrooms, in the unglamorous, unfilmable, unviral work of actually representing people who needed help. While she was building a platform, he was building a record. And when those two things met in a hearing room on a Wednesday morning in February, the platform collapsed and the record stood. Because the record always stands. The receipts always speak. And the truth, when spoken calmly and clearly by someone who knows how to present evidence, is louder than any performance could ever be. She learned that the hard way, in 5 minutes that were supposed to make her a hero, and instead made her a lesson. A lesson in what happens when you mistake virality for victory, when you mistake performance for preparation, when you mistake followers for facts, when you ask a question you think has no good answer and discover, too late, that the person you're questioning has been waiting his entire career to answer it. Not with anger, not with deflection, not with the defensive stammering of someone caught off guard, but with the calm, devastating precision of someone who brought the receipts. All of them, in a binder, with colored tabs, and read them into the record while the world watched. That's how it ended, not with a viral moment, but with a permanent record. Her record, her words, her contradictions, her lesson, and his answer.